Hello and welcome to the first office hours with Senator Burr. I'm joined here with my colleagues from DLA Piper, Karina, Lynch, and Senator Richard Burr. We are beginning today with webinar discussion that will be a regular feature. Every 2 weeks, we'll be having these discussions. Today's will be focused around the nomination process, but we are here to take you through our observations of the changing administration, what it means for your business, and what it might mean for your strategies. I'm Kirsten Axelsen. I am a senior policy advisor with DLA Piper. My work is mainly focused on the life sciences industry, where I have been working for about 24 of the last years. And I will be really pulling out some of the policy, some of the implications of policy or regulatory change. I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Karina, to introduce herself.
Kirsten, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Karina Lynch, the newest addition to the life sciences team at DLA. I'm happy to be here today to talk a little bit about this crazy busy season we're finding ourselves in with the new administration and all the nominations coming down the pike. I have also spent quite a bit of my career in the life sciences industry, recently joining DLA after being at another law firm. But before that, I worked on the Senate side for Senator Chuck Grassley from Iowa and Senator Susan Collins from Maine. So I spent a lot of time looking at issues before the Senate Help Committee, Senate Finance Committee, both of which will have a role in the confirmation process of some of the nominees we'll talk to today. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Senator Burr to give a brief intro on himself, although I think he's a man that needs no introduction, and then we'll get started talking about what we anticipate we're going to start to see in a few weeks. Senator Burr?
Karina, thank you, and thank Kirsten, and I thank all those that are participants today. And as Kirsten said, this hopefully will be a series that we will play throughout the confirmation process. We're initially going to really focus on process and to try to dispel rumors that may be floating around as to how each nominee is going to be handled. We'll try to give you as truthful information as we can. The reality is that at DLA, you might call me the intel guy. We're focused on collecting intel from Capitol Hill and the executive branch, turning that intel into analytic data that we can share with our clients. And what we're going to share with you today are not just data points, but they're going to be trend lines that we see from prior confirmation processes that may give us an indication exactly how long it's going to be before these individuals get into office. So with that, Kirsten, let me turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much. And we will be sending us follow-up material as well as our observation on the hearings. So those of you who signed up will be getting that to your inbox. And if you want to share this with your colleagues, have them sign up for our next office hours. Karina, I think you have some questions for the senator.
Senator Burr, as somebody who was in the United States Senate for quite some time and sat on some of the committees that are going to see some of these key nominations in the life sciences industry coming, can you talk a little bit about what that process looks like and what you expect to see over the next several months?
Well, I'll try to do it because we've already seen an exciting 2 weeks of the new Trump administration, given the fact that he has already nominated all of his cabinet positions, which is a huge departure from where we were just 8 years ago. In President Trump's first term, the average nominee took about 67 days to be confirmed. And that happened to be the majority leader's wife, Elaine Chao, as Secretary of Transportation. So you would expect that that would be the fastest. But there were many nominees like Rex Tillerson, who were well known, that took well over 100 days. So the reason for me to bring this historical context into it is I don't want people to walk away and say, oh my gosh, hair on fire. We're going to have a new secretary in place in a matter of weeks or a month. It's going to be several months, if not longer. The FDA commissioner in the first Trump administration was actually confirmed in May of 2017. So we've got plenty of time to prepare. But the reality is that there's got to be a pathway, and we know that there's some questionable nominees. And I want to take you in the committee side. The committee side is that you go through a very formal process of receiving the nomination. With that comes a packet on the nominee. The chair and the ranking member are privy to everything that's in the packet, typically an FBI background check, financial records, everything that you would imagine doing on somebody at a level of a nominee for a cabinet position. Now, there's some question as to whether there will actually be FBI packets. The Trump administration will decide exactly how they go through the clearing of each one of these nominees, but it will be up to the chair and the ranking member to determine the pathway and the timing of any confirmation hearings. I think it's safe to say that we've got a few of our former colleagues, like Marco Rubio, that will get enhanced expedited treatment. Excuse me, but I still think we're talking 60 to 70 days. There will be others in certain areas where their backgrounds aren't as well known, and where the committees, both Republican and Democrat, will want to dig a little bit deeper on information. And I think we can expect those to really play out for a little longer time. But Karina, let me address the elephant in the room. There are a couple of nominees that they may not make it through the process. We've already seen one withdraw. We may see that as an action by others, but let me dispel any rumor that the Senate is going to roll over and not play their constitutional role of advise and consent. I feel very confident that all senators will uphold the advise and consent rules. And for that reason, I believe that there won't be much of a discussion about recess appointments.
That was going to be my next question. If you could talk a little bit about what it takes not to get confirmed. You sort of touched on that, but do you want to elaborate a little bit more on that?
Well, I will. Members of Congress, members of the Senate want to know that the picks that they make are going to pass the smell test with people around the country. We can't always be part of the process as to who's nominated, but the Senate is there to confirm that there are no disqualifications that individual has. They could be financial, they could be legal. Certainly there are social issues that come into play in the past and will continue to come into play in the future. But at the end of the day, each senator is going to make a determination as, can this nominee carry out effectively the job they've been asked to do? And if in fact there's hesitancy on that, then the first tool that they would use is to go to the nominee and suggest that they withdraw their name. And they would do that in conjunction with the White House. I think that we have right now two nominees that, at least in the press, seem to have a challenging pathway forward. That will either be cleared up with the information that the nominees are able to convey to the committees of jurisdiction and to the membership at large in the Senate. My hope is that this does not become another political process. We understand that politics comes into play from a timing aspect, but it shouldn't come into play on nominees that are not contentious, and committees should have the ability to move through as expeditiously and a floor consideration as quick as possible. The public deserve to have permanent secretaries in place, and that's regardless of who the president is.
Thanks, Senator. I know that we are going to have a little time for Q&A towards the end of this. So with that, maybe I'll turn it over to you, Kirsten, to talk a little bit about the policy implications for companies as it relates to some of these nominations coming down the pike.
Thank you so much. And for those of you watching, please go ahead and start putting your Q&A in. You're just writing them in. If we don't get to all of them, we'll send around written answers at the conclusion of today's webinar. So, Senator, some of the nominees have made statements that I think some companies find alarming, particularly companies working in healthcare, maybe food. What are the opportunities, and how does a company align itself with the opportunities, that are presented with these new appointments?
Well, Kirsten, our biggest concern is that companies are going to continue to be distracted by who the nominee is and not focused on what they need to do as a company to prepare. As I said, most of these nominees will breeze right through, so they're in the job. If I were advising clients today, it would be, don't spend your time trying to figure out if or when somebody's going to be confirmed. Spend the time trying to figure out, how do I need to change how I approach Washington and especially the legislative pass. How do I need to do that differently based upon the makeup of this Congress? I've said in the past 24 hours that I think this is a much more transactional time that we're in. It means that relationships that have historically existed that gave you the ability to tap into educated people on the issues that your industry or your company were involved in, that day's gone. Those relationships have changed because personnel have left, and really the mode of communicating has changed so much. This election wasn't driven by what we saw on the nightly news. It was driven by what happened in the podcast world and alternative delivery mechanisms. And just like campaigns have turned into that, companies have to determine how they change their mode of communication to Capitol Hill and to the executive branch. At DLA, we look at the individuals that we have, and we look for expertise in certain areas. And then there's a secondary thing, access that they have to key personnel on Capitol Hill, because we want to make sure that our clients have multiple opportunities, multiple portals to present their issues to people on Capitol Hill. House and Senate, Republican and Democrat, we're there to make sure that their issues are at least heard and hopefully acted on.
Thank you. And then, how much do the major agencies' tone and operations depend on the appointees versus the career staff? Said another way, how much of a difference do these appointees really make, and in what ways?
Well, let me pick one agency because I've got 30 years of experience with FDA, and let me just address it. I'm much more concerned who the FDA commissioner is going to be than I am who the secretary is going to be. And in this case, we now have a FDA nominee, and I'm looking at Marty trying to figure out how much stuff do I need to read about what I might anticipate his first actions to be in the direction and the mission. And that's even a mistake, Kirsten, I would say, because he's going to carry out whatever the White House decides is the mission for FDA. It's not going to be the Secretary of HHS. It's going to be the Commander in Chief, and it's going to be what emanates from the White House. So the question is, in the case of FDA, how much can an FDA commissioner change? He can change the top level of advisors and division heads. But I think we all know that have dealt with the FDA a long time. The culture at the FDA is so deep that you're not going to change necessarily the reviewer's process to process applications. And that's where the real hang up is. So the leadership that we're looking for at the FDA is not as much about direction as it is about motivating a workforce to think and act differently. How do they bring new methods into practice? How do they bring flexibilities that didn't exist? I would tell you it's the common sense things that I and probably every person listening to this event has probably said, why doesn't the FDA do this? Why don't they do that? It's because it's culturally never been done. And with the right leadership there, I think they can begin to integrate new ways into the practice. And I think it'll change the product we get on the back end. And we'll learn from that. And hopefully that's going to incorporate new technology as well.
Thank you. So then as a follow-up to that question, if you were to anticipate where the big changes could be, and it could be, scrutiny of mergers, Inflation Reduction Act, where do you think there's going to be some big changes, either through executive order or something that that administrators can do without having to wait for Congress to act? Or conversely, do you think there's going to be a passage of a big change in law through the Congress? If you were a betting person, where would you see the big changes happening in the near term?
Well, the first thing I'd tell you probably happens on day one with an executive order that mandates that all federal employees go back in the office. And that will be a shocking thing for practically every agency, including the life science space. The second big initiative is going to be the change in who heads the FTC. I think mergers and acquisitions are going to be alive again. and without the scrutiny and the litigation that we've seen. And you've got to understand that industries operate just like a housing market operates, that if at any point in the housing market you have an interruption, everything stops. So it's the entry-level buyer that moves to the next house, that moves to the next house, that moves to the next house, that finally finds the one they're going to live in for the rest of their lives. If there's any interruption along the way, it stops. So when the FTC takes the actions that they have, believing that they have the power just to stop everything, what it stops is that capital investment in areas that are absolutely essential to creating jobs in the future, to creating breakthroughs in healthcare. And this has happened at an extremely sensitive time because technology, and I speak of AI specifically, is not only disruptive, it's transformational. And it's one of the areas that we as a law firm have invested heavily in to make sure that our clients can begin to integrate AI into all aspects of their business with the legal knowledge of knowing how to utilize data, staying away from sensitive litigation points. And we've also invested in the data analytics team that it takes in-house to do certifications of algorithms, to red team platforms. This is incredible from a standpoint of the one-stop shopping that we've created at DLA Piper. But we've done it because we believe that every client in the future, every person on this show is going to be faced with a situation of not if I use AI, if I use new technology, it's when I do and why I do it and how I do it. And we're prepared to do that, but we've got to have agencies that are accommodating to that type of technological use. So taking the chains off of us as it relates to the FTC will be a major boost to the capital investment needed for these technologies to really flourish at all levels with all companies.
Thank you so much. I see we're getting a few questions in from people who are listening to the call. I'll go ahead and take the first one, and then maybe Karina will take the next one. So how much autonomy does RFK Jr. have in selecting senior staff, such as Chief of Staff, General Counsel, and appointees such as Deputy Secretary and Head of ASPE?
Well, I think if you asked him, he would probably say total control. If you asked the White House, they would say they probably sign off on every one of them. So I'm not sure that any comments I could make would be accurate. I can tell you that in the past, there has been quite a bit of autonomy because you want to make sure that you've matched people who can work together. But I think it's safe to say that the Trump White House will probably make sure that there's a tremendous amount of overlap in adult supervision. And that's more to stay on focus and on mission. The president chose to go a different route than in his first administration, where he chose more recognizable individuals who people perceived to walk down the middle and had really no preference right or left to deviate. This time he's chosen people with backgrounds that were very outspoken on issues, so we can understand why people who might be in the food industry might be a little bit upset and concerned. Kirsten, I think what we would tell clients like that is seize on this opportunity. This is an opportunity for us to educate a new administration, to walk through with a new secretary why there are certain things that may on the surface seem like good, but in the long term, they might be devastating and have the wrong effects. Because at the end of the day, we have to show them the human face behind these issues. And sometimes it's different than somebody who runs for office or just expands and expounds on certain hot button issues that are out in the public that get attention. This is really when the rubber meets the road, and we've got to make sure that those individuals actually know the implications of anything they might initiate as far as regulations or policies. So we'll work very, very closely with whoever sits in the office, but also with the deputies and those folks at the agencies. I shared with you earlier today that one of my former colleagues, Dave Weldon, will be the new CDC director. I'm actually looking forward to having Dave there, but he will look at it very differently than Mandy Cohen did. And that's not because they come from different areas of the country. They were both docs. It's because there are different White Houses, and they have different missions for each of these agencies.
So when you say educate, do you mean going directly to agency staff, Congress, academics, newspapers? What do you mean when you say educate on your position or how your company works?
I mean, D, all the above. It means that we use the traditional shoe leather of Capitol Hill and the federal agencies. It means that we find individuals who we perceive to be experts, whether they write op-eds or whether they make Hill visits, to contribute to the understanding that staff and members have of the issues, to see it in a practical setting versus just the hypothetical. And I think when it relates to communications today, it requires a lot more coordination with communicating publicly about the issues that you're up working about. And it's not just op-eds versus physical meetings. It's about the media outlets that you use that actually penetrate. This campaign was won not because of the national network advertising, even though there were billions of dollars spent. This election probably was determined because of alternative media outlets like podcasts. And we're beginning to do regular podcasts within DLA on specific issues because we're trying to perfect how we do that to help clients in the future.
Thank you. Karina, do you have any questions?
With the time we have left, I would just suggest, folks, if you do have a question, pop it in the chat. We do have one as it relates to how realistic do you think a recess appointment is, Senator Burr, as it relates to some of these more controversial nominees, and maybe talk a little bit about, while it is a Republican Senate, it is still somewhat closely divided, and maybe the math of how many votes against these folks can we see before they would have to withdraw or they wouldn't make it across the finish line?
Well, let me just suggest it won't get to votes. If somebody's going to withdraw, it's going to be before the committee gets to a process of voting. So I don't think we're going to see multiple attempts to try to confirm somebody. Once they're out of committee and Republicans control a majority stake in all the committees, if it's determined this is the person, then they're going to be out. It will be determined by Chuck Schumer as to how long it takes to get off the floor. It's in his best interest and his members' best interest to do it as expeditiously as they can. But we all know there's going to be some contentious ones. Recess appointment, it's very unlikely. The threshold for recess appointments is so high that I just can't see a scenario. The United States Senate is not adjourned for over 10 days, I believe, since about 1990 something. So the belief that you could have a Senate agree to recess for 10 days and the House disagree with them or vice versa, and that a president could exercise Article 2, Section 3 to do a recess appointment would be challenged in the courts, number one, based upon what we've seen, and just would not be the expeditious way to get people through. There is a scenario where I see the Federal Vacancy Reform Act being utilized because it's a lot easier. They don't necessarily get to necessarily pick the person that they wanted. There's a length of time limit that's on their ability to serve. It's always best to say that the process that is set up is the fastest and the most reliable to get nominees through. And if we leave it up to the Senate to determine whether somebody's qualified, therefore they get out and they get a vote, or they're not qualified and the administration goes back to the drawing board, whether it's by withdrawal or rejection, that's always the best route to go. And I think the president and the administration, regardless of what it is, would be wise to follow that.
Thank you so much. I think we're about at time. Senator, any final thoughts from you? Yeah,
Kirsten, let me say that if things are going to become clear as the weeks go on. I think when we planned this last week, which was an expedited launching of office hours, we had about 7 nominees at the time. Now we've got a complete cabinet filled out. None of us believed that that would be the case when we got here today. Now we're headed into probably a total over this whole process of about 1,400 nominees, about 1,200 of those having to go through confirmation. So we've got a long ways to go, and sometimes it's down the list that's most important. But what I want our listeners to understand, this is not going to be focused on just life science. As we move on now that we're beginning to get agency level nominees, we're going to dig down into each one of the agencies. We're going to pull in people from the DLA staff who deal with FDA regulatory, that deal with FDA food, that deal with the legal side of FDA. We're going to pull folks in that have CDC experience to talk about internally how this might be processed at the CDC and what maybe the changes are. I want everybody to understand we're not leaving a sector off of this. We're going to do as many sectors as we feel we have the expertise to do. So this is going to continue to be an educational process that will, again, follow the confirmation process as well. So we're going to be in that confirmation process for somewhere between 60 and 130 days, which means that between now and May, we're going to, every 2 weeks, cover what's happened the last 2 weeks, maybe cover what's happened the next 2 weeks. And I'll remind everybody, we're going to provide a hard copy to everybody that's on the show today that gives you a recap of everything that was covered, potentially some slide decks that may show you the nominees and compare them to prior administrations and how long it took. Just so from a planning standpoint, those of you who participate in this can have some idea as to what your expectations should or should not be.
Thank you so much. The questions we didn't get to, we will either address in a follow-up note or on a future call. Hope to see you again at office hours.
Thank you.